Harold here. A future king walks into a carefully arranged family summit at Windsor, a gathering that had required months of quiet negotiation among the most senior members of the household. Every principal figure expected is present. The purpose is to resolve matters the family has circled for the better part of a year. Within less than a minute, before anyone has taken a seat, the entire meeting is cancelled. The reason is a single face in the room, a face that did not appear on the guest list provided to William in advance. That face belongs to Camilla's private solicitor. The moment William registers her presence, he turns and ends the proceedings. The cancellation itself is not the story. The real story is why the appearance of one lawyer rendered the summit impossible and what that decision reveals about the current state of trust inside the family. In this family, a summit has never been a casual conversation. It is a rare and deliberate instrument, convened only when ordinary channels have failed and something of genuine consequence must be settled face to face. The word itself carries institutional memory. Those who understand the household know that a summit is not called lightly. It requires weeks or months of careful coordination, the alignment of diaries that are rarely free, the quiet agreement of principals who prefer to keep their distance, and the tacit understanding that whatever is decided inside that room will shape arrangements for years to come. The precedent remains the Sandringham meeting of January 2020, when Charles, William, Harry, and the late Queen sat together to negotiate the terms of Harry and Meghan's departure from royal life. That gathering established the template in the public mind and inside the family itself. When the stakes become existential, the senior members assemble in one room and decide. Word that a Windsor summit was being organized therefore carried an unmistakable signal. Something substantial concerning the future shape of the family and the arrangements that would follow the end of Charles's reign was about to be placed on the table. The very decision to convene it told every informed observer that normal conversation had already failed, that letters and intermediaries and private assurances were no longer considered sufficient, and that the matter had risen to the level where only the collective presence of the principal figures would do. In a family that rarely puts everything on the table at once, the calling of a summit is itself a declaration of gravity. Charles's cancer diagnosis, announced by the palace in early 2024, changed the emotional climate inside the household more profoundly than any public statement could capture. Questions that had long been left deliberately vague, questions of control, of standing, of continuity, once the reign changed hands, acquired sudden urgency. A clock had been introduced. Nothing concentrates the minds of people with much to lose like the knowledge that time is no longer unlimited. Before the diagnosis, certain arrangements could be deferred indefinitely. After it, every unresolved matter began to feel provisional. The diagnosis did not create the underlying tensions. It simply removed the luxury of postponement. Charles continued working through treatment, a fact the palace was careful to emphasize, yet the knowledge that the present reign was no longer open-ended altered calculations on every side. For those whose positions depended on Charles remaining on the throne, the future suddenly looked less secure. For those who would inherit the authority once he was gone, the need to protect the integrity of that future authority became more pressing. The summit grew out of that pressure, not from any public crisis, but from a quieter recognition that the window for settling certain matters was beginning to close. In families of ordinary means, a serious illness often forces difficult conversations that have been avoided for years. In this family, the same dynamic operates, only the stakes are measured in residences, titles, influence, and the quiet architecture of power that will outlast any single individual. Even the location carried deliberate meaning. Buckingham Palace would have signaled state business, formal, institutional, on the record. Clarence House would have placed the meeting on Charles's own ground, the king's domestic territory. Windsor was selected because it remains the family's private heart, a place saturated with generational memory, the setting they reach for when they wish a gathering to feel less like government and more like blood. The choice was intended to frame the occasion as intimate rather than institutional, to invite participants to enter as family rather than as rivals or office holders. That framing was not neutral. Warmth lowers defenses. Lowered defenses were precisely what the architects of the meeting required. Windsor carries centuries of private history. It is the place where the family has retreated in moments of both celebration and crisis. By choosing it, the organizers were saying, in effect, leave the machinery of state at the door. Come as a son, not as a future sovereign calculating the boundaries of his eventual authority. The more successfully a room is dressed in the language of kinship, the more difficult it becomes for anyone inside it to maintain the vigilance that institutional self-interest demands. That was the calculated effect. The intimacy was not hospitality, it was strategy. The summit was presented as an informal family conversation among senior relatives and a small number of trusted household advisors. William had been given a version of the guest list in advance, as is customary before any gathering of this kind. Camilla's private solicitor did not appear on it. She was either added late or never listed at all. The omission was intentional. Had her presence been ordinary and above board, her name would have been disclosed without hesitation. Concealment is reserved for elements whose effectiveness depends on surprise. The plan rested on William entering the room unaware that a private lawyer would be present. In the careful choreography of royal gatherings, the guest list is never a mere formality. It tells every participant how to behave, what tone to adopt, and what level of formality or candor is expected. A list that contains only family and long-standing advisors signals warmth and off-the-record discussion. The sudden appearance of a private solicitor belonging to one principal figure signals something else entirely. The fact that her name was kept from William until the moment he walked through the door is the clearest evidence that those arranging the meeting understood the difference. They knew that if he had seen the name in advance, he would never have agreed to enter. So they made certain he would not see it until it was, they hoped, too late for him to withdraw without creating a visible rupture. William entered and saw her standing near the window. Camilla's own solicitor, not a palace legal advisor serving the institution, but the individual who represents Camilla's personal interests. The distinction is decisive. The presence of a private lawyer converts a family conversation into a negotiation. Anything spoken becomes capable of being recorded, witnessed, and later characterized as consent. An informal nod ceases to be a gesture of goodwill and becomes evidence. William registered the face, performed the calculation in a single glance, and understood that the room had been constructed to produce an outcome rather than to host a discussion. Most people walking into a warm room filled with relatives would have registered an unfamiliar face and extended the benefit of the doubt. An aide, perhaps, a new member of the household staff, someone's personal assistant. William did none of that. He identified the woman immediately. He knew whose interests she served. He noted that she had not been on the list provided to him. He observed her quiet positioning at the side of the room rather than among the family. And from those facts alone, he read the entire purpose of the afternoon. He required no agenda and no explanation. The presence of that specific person in that specific role, unannounced, was itself the agenda. The speed of the recognition reveals a man who has learned, through repeated experience, to treat every carefully arranged room as a potential instrument of management. Most people extend the benefit of the doubt because that is what warmth is designed to elicit. William did the opposite. In the space of a few seconds, he stacked every relevant fact: her identity, her absence from the list, her placement in the room, the framing of the meeting as purely familial, and arrived at a single conclusion. The conclusion was negotiation. He did not need anyone to tell him. He did not need to hear the opening remarks. The lawyer by the window was the tell, and he read it instantly. That capacity is not instinct in the ordinary sense. It is the product of years spent watching how this family conducts its private business, of seeing how soft language and closed doors can produce hard outcomes, and of learning that the most dangerous arrangements are often the ones presented as the most benign. By the time he had taken 3 steps into the room, he had already decided that the safest course was not to take a seat at all. For William to interpret a single face as an ambush, trust must already have been exhausted. He did not pause to consider an innocent explanation. His immediate assumption was that he was being positioned. The accuracy of that assumption is almost secondary. What matters is the condition of the relationship it exposes. One side now proceeds on the premise that the other is always working an angle. Once that premise is accepted, every gathering becomes a chessboard to be scanned for traps. William has reached the point where he cannot enter a family meeting without reading it as a potential enclosure. That is a lonely posture for a man who will one day be king, yet it is the posture that long experience has taught him is necessary. The relationship between William and Camilla has never been warm. It has been managed, polite where required, and carefully distant. The presence of her private solicitor in a room framed as pure family business confirmed for him that the distance was not merely personal, it was structural. When trust has eroded to this degree, even the appearance of goodwill becomes suspect. The lawyer's presence did not create the suspicion. It merely confirmed a suspicion that had already hardened into operating principle. The question left by the headlines is why he did not simply sit down and discover what would be said. William understood that the danger did not lie primarily in the words that might be spoken. The danger lay in the room. Once he took a a seat and allowed the conversation to proceed with a private solicitor present. Any softening, any apparent accommodation offered in the interest of peace could later be framed as consent given under observation. The only reliable way to defeat a trap constructed out of a room is to refuse the room. He did so without debate and without public accusation. He simply stated that the meeting would not proceed and left, removing the one element on which the entire exercise depended: his presence on the record. A man who sits down in such a setting has already conceded the first and most important point. He has accepted the terms of engagement. William declined those terms before they could be spoken. In doing so, he denied the other side the one asset they most needed: his participation, however reluctant, in a process that could later be described as consensual. The refusal was not dramatic. It was surgical. It left no scene to be recounted, no raised voice to be leaked, no moment of visible conflict that could be turned against him. It simply removed the possibility of the outcome the room had been built to produce. The pattern is familiar to anyone who has watched how power actually moves inside this family. Real contests are rarely settled by argument. They are settled by paperwork and by the quiet presence of those who control the documents. William has observed what a single carefully prepared legal instrument can achieve. He was not prepared to place himself on the wrong side of another such instrument. The lawyer by the window told him that the afternoon was designed to manufacture something that would be difficult to unwind later. In earlier episodes, forgotten folders and quiet legal maneuvers have decided the fate of estates and arrangements that ordinary conversation could never have resolved. The presence of a private solicitor in a family room converts every spoken word into potential material for later characterization. An informal understanding becomes, in the hands of counsel, something closer to agreement. William had seen that mechanism operate. He had no intention of supplying it with material. The lesson of the documents is that the person who controls the paper controls the outcome long after the conversation has ended. By refusing to enter the conversation on those terms, he refused to supply the paper. The purpose of the summit, according to those familiar with the planning, was continuity, securing Camilla's position, residences, role, and influence beyond the end of Charles's reign. The word sounds measured and responsible until one asks for whose benefit the continuity is being arranged. In practical terms, it meant converting temporary arrangements into durable ones, while Charles still held the authority to lend them weight. A formal legal route would have required William's explicit written agreement, something he has previously refused. An informal family summit with a lawyer present to witness and record offered the possibility of manufacturing the appearance of consensus without ever securing a signature. Continuity is a soft word. It suggests the responsible preservation of what already exists. In this context, it meant something more specific: the attempt to lock in, while the present king could still bless the arrangement, a set of understandings that would constrain the freedom of the next. The strategy depended on the room itself: warmth, familiarity, the presence of an ailing father, the framing of the discussion as purely familial. All of it was intended to make refusal feel like cruelty and acquiescence feel like duty. The lawyer's quiet presence was the mechanism that would later allow any such acquiescence to be given formal weight. The proposed understanding, by the accounts available, sought certainty over which residences and private comforts Camilla would retain as a widow, a defined and protected public role, and a measure of ongoing involvement in family matters after Charles's death. From William's perspective, each of those elements represented a preemptive claim on the prerogatives of his own future reign. A future king cannot accept that the previous king's widow holds locked-in rights over residences and influence that properly belong to the new sovereign. The only moment such claims can be secured is while Charles remains alive and able to lend his authority to them. Once the power changes hands, the answer becomes permanent refusal. The clock was not merely pressure, it was the strategy. The residences in question are not merely houses, they are symbols of standing and continuity. A defined public role for a widowed queen consort is not merely a courtesy, it is a claim on the attention and resources of the institution. Any measure of ongoing influence in family matters after the change of reign is a direct constraint on the freedom of the new king and queen. William understood that once such arrangements are given even the appearance of family consensus, they become far harder to unwind. The summit was designed to produce that appearance, while the authority to bless it still rested with Charles. Every detail of the setting, the choice of Windsor, the language of family conversation, the informal atmosphere, was designed to lower William's guard at the precise moment when an accommodating word might be spoken and later recorded. The kindness of the room was functional. The architect architects did not construct a hostile environment. They constructed the most disarming environment possible because disarming was the necessary condition. Warmth deployed for the purpose of management is the specific trigger William's experience has trained him to distrust. The more successfully the room was made to feel like home, the more effectively it could function as an instrument. That is the cold logic beneath the surface hospitality. A hostile meeting would have put William on his guard from the first moment. An intimate one was intended to do the opposite. The engineering of warmth is a more sophisticated form of pressure than open confrontation. It relies on the natural human reluctance to create discord in a setting that has been carefully prepared to feel familial. William recognized the engineering for what it was. Instead of relaxing into the warmth, he read it as the mechanism of the trap and stepped outside it. Camilla's anxiety is not invented. When Charles dies, she becomes a widow of a former king, retaining a title but losing the structure of support and standing that exists solely because her husband occupies the throne. Residences, staff, automatic centrality, almost all of it is borrowed. The day the loan is called in, she moves from the center of the institution to its edge. Her future then depends on the goodwill of a stepson with whom relations have been distant for 2 decades. The instinct to secure something permanent while leverage still exists is human. Fear of that magnitude does not require villainy to explain it. It requires only a clear view of the cliff that lies ahead. She has watched, from close range, how this family treats those who lose their central place. The transition from queen consort to dowager is abrupt and almost total. The machinery of state occasions, the automatic inclusion, the institutional weight, all of it transfers overnight to the new king and queen. What remains is a title, whatever personal resources are genuinely her own, and whatever goodwill the new reign chooses to extend. That is a precarious position for anyone. For a woman who has already endured years of public hostility, the prospect is especially stark. The summit was her attempt, and Charles's, to build some form of protection before the cliff arrived. Charles, confronting his own mortality with greater clarity, wished to leave his wife protected. He had spent decades securing their life together and had watched her absorb sustained public hostility at his side. The desire that she should not be diminished or left to the uncertain mercy of a court that never fully accepted her is the desire of a husband, not a strategist. He lent his weight to the summit in an attempt to solve an equation that may have no clean solution. How to protect her when the only person with the power to do so after his death is the one least inclined to extend that protection freely. The tragedy is that the method chosen to solve the equation, the disguised room, the unannounced lawyer, the manufactured consensus, was the one method most likely to confirm William's deepest suspicions. Charles is not a man who relishes intricate plots. By most accounts, he was driven by genuine fear for his wife's future, and by the knowledge that his own time to act was limited. The failure of the summit left him holding both the unsolved problem and the exposure of the method used to address it. That combination is heavier than simple defeat. William's response cannot be understood without reference to his mother. He has spent his adult life observing the institution manage, arrange, and quietly engineer outcomes behind soft language and closed doors. The last time such management was applied in the interest of institutional comfort. The person who paid the price was Diana. At 15, he absorbed, in the most permanent way possible, what the machine does to those it decides are inconvenient. A warm room, careful framing, and a lawyer positioned to record cooperation therefore registers to him not as family discussion, but as the same machinery wearing a familiar face. His refusal was not merely legal caution. It was an almost instinctive rejection of being handled. The memory is not abstract. It is specific, visceral, and still active. When the institution dresses its management in the language of family and concern, William hears the older pattern. The warmth that was meant to disarm him instead activated the deepest layer of distrust. They aimed at his sense of duty and kinship. They struck his memory of how kinship had been used before. The result was not hesitation. It was immediate withdrawal. In the 60 seconds that decided the afternoon, William did not create a scene. He offered no public accusation that could later be characterized as paranoia or aggression. He simply declined to participate and left. The result was an empty room and an afternoon without a narrative. No raised voice, no slammed door, no moment of visible conflict that could be turned against him. In a family where stories are currency, an absence is almost impossible to weaponize. Silence cannot be leaked. A calm refusal cannot be turned into a portrait of the aggressor. That restraint is not weakness. It is the more precise form of power. Had he exploded, the story would have written itself. The aggressive stepson, the humiliated stepmother, the wounded dead father. By saying almost nothing, he denied the other side every usable element of narrative. He left them with an empty afternoon and the private knowledge that their design had been read and rejected. In the long contest of perception that shapes outcomes inside this family, the absence of a scene is often more valuable than any victory that produces one. A private conversation between William and Charles took place afterward, without advisors. Charles did not deny the purpose of the summit. He made the case as a father and husband that he sought only to protect someone he loved and to secure certainty for her while it remained possible. William, according to those accounts, acknowledged the fear without accepting the method. He indicated that a genuine discussion of Camilla's future could take place openly, with every participant knowing exactly what was on the table and without a lawyer concealed as a guest. What he would not accept was being maneuvered. The subject itself was not the difficulty, the ambush was. The exchange was quieter and sadder than the public might imagine. There was no theatrical confrontation. There was a father attempting to explain a fear that felt existential and a son declining to be managed even by that fear. The question William is said to have put, if the arrangement was fair and reasonable, why did it require a hidden lawyer and a disguised room cut to the center of the matter? A proposal that cannot survive open scrutiny is already confessing something about its own substance. After the collapse, William made clear that any future meeting presented as a family conversation would be exactly that, and that any legal representation would have to be disclosed in writing to all participants in advance. The loophole the summit had been designed to exploit was closed. Princess Anne, by some accounts, grasped the nature of the episode more quickly than most and observed in her characteristic direct manner that a lawyer at a family meeting is never accidental and that William had been right to leave. Anne's institutional loyalty is to process rather than to personality. Her judgment that the room itself had been improper carries particular weight. She is the family's most consistent guardian of proper form. When she concludes that a process was bent in order to secure an outcome that the proper process would have denied, her verdict is difficult to dismiss as mere partisanship. The precedent William set is structural. The soft, informal room with the unannounced lawyer is no longer available as a tactic. That is a more lasting consequence than any temporary embarrassment. The continuity plan is now exposed and the soft route is closed. Camilla is left dependent on the goodwill she most feared having to rely upon. Charles is left with a failed attempt that revealed more than it achieved. William is left more firmly in control of the terms on which the future will be discussed. Yet the underlying human question, what becomes of a widowed queen consort when the reign ends, remains exactly as unanswered as it was before the summit was arranged. Both truths stand. William was right to refuse management, and the problem they were clumsily attempting to manage is real and still unresolved. The decisive event of that day was not anything that was said. It was a future king noticing a lawyer by a window and choosing in a single second not to sit down. In this family, the loudest moves are rarely the ones that matter. The real ones are often silence, a closed door, and the capacity to read a room before it closes. The summit that never took place achieved nothing it was designed to achieve. What it did achieve was clarity. The method had been tried and found wanting. The underlying difficulty remains, waiting for a form of resolution that does not depend on disguise.